We know that sporting success comes from multidisciplinary teams and working together, and so actually this conversation centres around sharing each other's experiences and how we can better support female athletes moving forward with the different sporting experiences that we have. I'd like to remind everyone that elite sport is a pressured environment. It is exciting, but also it is sensitive because of that, and so people are sharing their individual experiences, and so we should be mindful of that. It is an intimate panel and it's going to be conversational, so hopefully the panel will ask each other questions and we will have an opportunity to have questions from the audience towards the end of the panel. So I will just get each panellist to introduce themselves, if that's possible, briefly. So if we start with you, please, Paige.
Is this? Oh yeah, it's on. Sorry. I'm Paige Fuller. I'm a former professional jumps jockey. I retired in March, and so yeah, I'm just working out my next career steps.
I'm Victoria Williams. I'm technically still a professional footballer, but I'm out of a contract at the moment. I've been playing for 5 years at Brighton and Hove Albion, and yeah, hopefully still going to play. So.
I'm Kira Rothwell, netballer. I play for Saracens Mavericks and previously in the England Futures programme.
I'm Sarah Hunter, recently retired rugby player in March, and as of Monday started a coaching role with England Rugby.
I'm Sophia Smale, sort of just made my way in the professional game, play for Western Storm, and then England under-19s.
Thanks, everybody. So just a simple question to get it started. You've each had interactions with your various players' associations. So the first question was, at what stage in your career did you realise that you had the support of the Players Association, and what sort of things have you relied on them for? I'll start with you, Victoria.
Yeah, I better go. I've got the microphone. So I actually didn't sign a professional contract until I was 25. I've played in the WSL for 11 years now, since its inception, barring one season in the second tier. And so my first professional contract I signed at Sunderland. And it's funny actually, because at the time we were sort of spoken to about, you know, the support we can get from the PFA, and I think at the time the main incentive was the £300 boot voucher, which everyone was like so excited for, because it was also at a time where sort of commercial opportunities for women's footballers were basically non-existent unless you were like a world-class superstar. So I have to admit during my 3 seasons at Sunderland, I don't think I actually utilised any of the services that the union offer. It wasn't until sort of the PFA kept coming in more and the women's game grew more that I started to learn about sort of the services that they offer, and sort of I've used a variety of the services, from sort of mental well-being, contractual advice, and also disciplinary advice. I didn't do anything bad, but but my point is that I've benefited a lot from the union, and it's been so good to sort of have somewhere that you can, whatever it is in and around the game, you can actually just pick up the phone and call someone, no matter what the issue is, and if they don't know the answer, they will literally point you in the right direction, and someone will contact you, I would say mostly within a few days, especially with the mental wellbeing support. That's actually immediate. I think they have a 24/7 hotline, that is, isn't it? Yeah. So yeah, I'll stop blabbing and pass on anyway.
Thanks for that. I just wanted to ask Kira, because netball's Players Association is in its infancy compared to some of the other sports. So I just wondered, you are a young up-and-coming netballer, so I just wondered your interactions with the Players Association and what you've relied on it for.
Yeah, I'd say coming into Super League maybe 4 years ago now, I knew about the Players Association, but my first proper experiences with it were really through the England programme, because this is too close to my mouth. Through the England programme. What am I doing wrong? I'll just keep going. Because most of the girls who were in that were already in it, if not all of them, and we were told the importance of the collective player's voice and all of that, and I think that was one of the major selling points, bringing in centralised contracts, bringing in, like, I was a training partner at the time for my Super League team, and it was the first time that we got paid as training partners. And I remember Sarah, who's sitting over there, being one of the main involved in that, and that was so cool for us as training partners, and I think it's grown so much further now to just being a neutral voice and something you can go to, contract negotiations like you mentioned, but even having links all around the country. Like Sarah lives in Scotland, I went up to Scotland, she came and picked me up from the station, little things like that. Having someone who can help you out, you can rely on, but also there to push the game forwards.
So with the exception of netball, the majority of the players' associations represented by the panellists have a male counterpart that has a longer history than the female counterpart. So Paige, I wanted to come to you just to ask if there's anything specific that is geared towards female athletes from your players' association, but also things in your sport that you think are different to the men's side of the racing. Donna mentioned earlier that actually we see male sport and we can be different and better. So how does that reflect with you?
Yeah, I think racing's quite an interesting one because in general, we're an industry where people are very grateful to take part in it. And sometimes I think that the standards for everyone have slipped so low, like we were discussing it earlier, that actually it becomes very difficult when standards for all athletes are so low, trying to get them to recognise that actually developing to a higher level also includes diversifying in how you're sort of targeting moving it forward. So for example, in my role on the PGA board, initially when I turned professional, I was only professional for 5 years in the end. I was 5 years an amateur, 5 years professional. And I turned and I was just so sick of sitting on top of each other in the weighing rooms, sitting in a tent outside, not having our own showering facilities and stuff, that I was like, I know it's terrible for the boys, but like, this is ridiculous that we don't even have some of our own changing facilities at times. Like, don't get me wrong, by the time I turned professional, they were addressing that. But the lads kind of turn around and they're like, oh, we don't understand why our facilities need improving. Like, we've got a shower, we've got what we need. Like, why does it matter if we're sat in something that hasn't been touched since 1970? Like, it doesn't affect us. And it was trying to get everyone to recognise that actually, yes, it isn't great for everyone, but by raising the bar for everyone and then specifically helping females have a really safe environment to work in, which has been lacking as well, that helps everyone, but sometimes it's really hard to get people to realise that.
Thanks. And Sophia, there's a push for professionalisation of the women's game, and you pretty much hit the scene last year and got a professional contract, but still doing your A-levels. So I wondered what your ideas are for the future of your professional development, education-wise, or do you think you might go into professional cricket? And do you think it's good that you have the options, and do the Players Association support you with making those choices?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very, very lucky that I've come at a time where the women's game is obviously on the up. I think it was not long ago there wasn't many professional contracts for women, so there was a lot of people on sort of you pay as you play, you get paid to play a match, but you don't get paid to train or anything. So I'm lucky in the sense that there's more contracts now. So yeah, I moved straight onto that in October whilst doing my A-levels, and I got a lot of support in that regard because I was obviously we're training 4 days a week, but I'm still trying to do A-levels was quite a struggle. So I guess yeah, the PCA and Western Storm, who I'm with, were really, really supportive of that, and I tried to come in like twice a week. And yeah, obviously I'm very, very lucky that now you don't really have to think about getting a job, you don't have to think about further education, and I think that's why this year I will not be going to uni and I'm going to get straight into cricket. I guess I'm very grateful for the opportunity. And I think my parents are very supportive of the fact that like you basically get one shot at it, so like you could do your university or get a job further down the line. Like take it as it comes straight away. So yeah, I mean, when I look back and I speak to some of the older girls at the team, like they had to go to uni, they had to get a job, as well as being on contracts or not on contracts. So I'm very, very lucky now that there's the option to do both.
And I think that's an interesting discussion because obviously as the game gets more professional, we know that men have issues when they're transitioning out of their sport in terms of what do they do, their identity and their careers, if they haven't had an education. And so I just wondered, anybody on the panel, if you wanted to discuss, I know a number of you, I know Paige, you left university in Exeter to pursue your professional career. Sarah, I know you've got a degree, a dual degree from Loughborough. Kira, you graduated or are going to graduate this year, hopefully. And so I just wanted to get an idea of if you think it's a good thing that players are going professional and not having that dual career, and how you think we're going to look in 20 years from now, potentially with lots of people, as Sophia says, not going to university and being a professional athlete.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely amazing that like players like yourself are able to come straight out of school and into professional contracts, and we've now got it within rugby as well. Like, we're very young in our professional era since 2019, so what's that, 4 years if my maths is correct. And one of the things our association have done is really push on the contract side of things. Like, we've got a world leading professional contract in the game in rugby across the world, which is fantastic. I think from like that perspective, like, I feel fortunate that I did have a dual career. So yes, I went to university, and yes, I had like a full-time career, and it was tough. It really, like, being a player at the same time, but coming on that transition now, like, I remember the RPA coming in and like asking, well, like, what do you want to do? What are you interested in doing? And that's where I started my coaching like journey with them, getting my qualifications through them, and now that's where I'm going in. And I think the one thing, and I think sometimes our younger players think I'm a bit old when I say when I talk to them about it, but it's fine to like throw yourself into the playing side of it and being a professional, absolutely, but just have one mind on what is next. And it's not saying that you have to go to university or you have to do any formal education, but maybe just start to think and utilise the services that I'm sure all the associations provide, just to start thinking around, because you never know when your last game is, never know when you might not get a contract, or especially in the women's game, we get contracted from England, and if you don't have that, then you've got to find a job, basically. So I think the advice I tried to impart on them, and sometimes they think I was being boring, was just have a think about and take up some of the opportunities. We get a lot of opportunities provided from our player development managers to try different skills and see what it is you're interested in, and just keep an open mind whilst you're playing whatever sport you are to try and take some up, so when your time does come, you've got a transition that's maybe slightly easier into what's life like after sport.
And just before I move on to someone else, your new role within the Red Roses around transition, could you tell us a little bit about that and how significant it is that role has been created, and how you can impart that advice in a way that young up-and-coming athletes listen to who haven't got a dual career?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's an ever-changing role. It's a brand new role, which is really exciting. So we're going to have transition contracts for the first time ever. So players that maybe are still age grade, or maybe just fallen out of the age grade pathway and maybe not quite ready for seniors. And I'll try and support them on their path to senior international rugby, and try and like mentor them and guide them through. We've got people at university, people that sit outside of university to try and get them up to that level. I'll drop into senior coaching as well, so that'll be interesting, having to go and coach the players I played alongside. But you know, it's a brand new role, and it just shows you where the nature of the game's going for the women's game and rugby, is that they're thinking differently. Like, it's not a role that's in the men's game. It's like, well, what is it best needed for the women's game? So yeah, that'll be making me very busy over the next few weeks, months and years, no doubt.
Thanks. And Paige, I don't know if you wanted to add anything in terms of, you left university, and has that impacted you in terms of your career post being a jockey, and if you could go back, would you have stayed at university? What would you recommend to young up-and-coming jockeys?
So I actually kind of grew up in an environment where there weren't female professional jockeys at all, really. I think there were probably one or two. And so I sort of had it in my head that basically by getting a career, being able to afford to fund my career, that was like the only route forwards. And sort of my only advice is actually to anyone is kind of actually throw yourself in it and make the most of your opportunities, more for the fact that I think I'm in a far more interesting position now through embracing all the opportunities that were given to me, through coming onto the, getting the experience with the PJA, also through the work I've done with JETS as well, Jockeys Education and Training Scheme. We've got a really proactive kind of provider of the training, which really helps, because when you're off injured, like, it's great, you can engage with them and do courses while you're off injured. And actually, I don't know whether or not I'd be in a better position, but I don't think I'd be in a more interesting position, like sitting here on this panel today, getting to meet people who actually are very sort of like-minded. Like, if you just sort of embrace what you're passionate about, I think you kind of find opportunities. And I'm actually quite interested to hear like what all your sports provisions like, because I know I've been quite spoilt from how proactive our sort of education provider is, but I'd love to hear how the other sports are.
Yeah, so the PFA are actually really good, and sort of alluding to what you'd said, I think it is important to sort of have some balance. I totally agree with throwing yourself in, and like, as any athlete wants to, do you know what I mean? You want to go head first into it, but I think with hindsight in mind, I would say to the young players now, like, have something else that you do like to do, because, like you said, if you do get injured or if things don't go your way, or you might find a season where you don't have a contract, and I think sort of having that balance and perspective, and yeah, it's massive, and that's what the PFA help with. So part of the education program is, I mean, you can do a variety of things. They'll support you if you want to do sort of a degree or a postgraduate degree. You can even do things like learn how to be a locksmith, for example, trades and things like that. Like, it's sort of open-ended, and if there's something that they don't already offer as a course, you can get in touch with them, and depending on how long you've been a member of the union, and actually that's probably what I do stress to sort of the younger players, like in teams I've been in, it's worth being a member, because the longer you're a member, the better your support is. So whilst you might think you don't need the support now, I don't know if you're in your early 20s or, you know what I mean, you're just breaking onto the scene, continue to support your union, because one day when you need them, like, that maximum support will be there for you, and post-playing. I actually know a girl I used to play with, she was diagnosed with... this is terrible if you're recording it, 'cause I can't remember, but basically it was career ending, and at the time I think she was only about 19, and the PFA actually sort of paid her like an amount of money in order so that she could continue her treatment. And I think she'd only been a member for a couple of years, because like I said, the PFA support in the women's game at the time, it was very new, but they still honoured that membership, and gave her financial support just so she can, like, do you know what I mean, look at what is after football, especially when her career was ended so short. So yeah, that's what I would say to the young players, like, utilise your union, and there's actually more to them than you can ever imagine, like, just across your life in general. And the things that sort of the PFA push for in terms of like governance in and around the game is now sort of, it's having a domino effect onto how clubs are operating, because they know, do you know what I mean, the union have got the players back now, and that is actually forcing like better support for women's players, especially in football. So yeah.
I think just what you mentioned around the PFA, I've done some work in the mental health space with the PFA and some athletes, and I was fascinated at how much support the PFA has, and I think it's because it is such a large union. So the MPA is in its infancy, but even athletes who've been retired for 30 years still get the support of the PFA. So it has such great power. And I think it's when you're inexperienced or you're young in your athletic career, you don't necessarily realise that there's so many things that you might need along your journey. And so I just wondered if the panel could share any touch points that they've had with their Players Association. Obviously, we've had a few examples already, but key moments where you think the Players Association has helped or supported you or any of your colleagues.
I think just on like our RPA association, I think it sounds very similar in terms of like, the level of support that I think the women's game has got, and it's grown over time. Like, so I think we started out with our player development managers, and I felt that at times it was there to grow that relationship about what's next, that education, but it's just like enormous. Like I said, the level of support, that voice support that they've given in terms of contract negotiation is huge. Like, we've just like had a world-renowned maternity policy. So actually we've got 2 players that probably not too long from about to have children, which will be the first 2 mothers naturally giving birth in our squad, which without it like that support wouldn't have been there. So those sorts of things are like just huge for players, you know, to say, well, you can be like a player and a mother and you don't have to choose between that. The support like from mental health, we know how much like mental health affects performance, and similar having that 24-hour hotline, like the education, they come in, like little things around social media awareness and how you like make sure your social media secure and the way in which people live. You hear they're great, the people that come and talk to us and share the stories of when it goes drastically wrong, so they're there to help. I mean, I personally had help and support in contractual sort of confusion around myself and another party, and they were great. Like, there was no stress. They did everything to help in that way. And it just, when you think you're worried and concerned about something, like, they've got such a wide range and speciality of people in their organisation that there's no worry, no concern. They're there to help you, and I think that's really nice that you've got like people to go to that's away from the people that are going to be selecting you and contracting you and confidential, and actually to know you've got that peace of mind in whatever area it is enables you to focus on performing when you need to get out on the pitch. And I think having that separate organisation and building relationships with the people there that you can then trust, I think it's been really important. In the RPA over the years have been like brilliant for the women's game. And I know Christian, who's now General Secretary, is that right? It was part of his manifesto in terms of like what they're going to do for the women's game, and they've done a great job at international level. And now obviously the domestic game for women's rugby is growing. It's not professional yet, but there's now things around contracting and everything that comes with professionalisation that the women's game is probably young players a bit maybe naive to. So they're looking about how they can get involved in that and just trying to shape that. So from our perspective, I think having an association like the RPA, it's brilliant for the players that are part of it. And like you say, like, we try and get the players to realise and utilise just how important it is, and just what they can do on an individual basis for anyone that's involved with them.
Thanks. And so you've just mentioned there what they can do on an individual basis, but I wondered how important the power of collective representation is. So anyone want to?
I think this has been a massive one for, well, all sports, but talking from netball, getting like centralised contracts where we could all have the same facilities, those sort of things, and it's got a long way to go. I was involved in a talk group a few months ago, like trying to work out were all the Super League clubs having the same facilities, the same access to all your support services like nutrition, psychology, S&C, all those things, and it turned out it was very different across the sports across the clubs. For example, ones that were linked to universities might have extra support from the university. Ones that were linked to, like ourselves, rugby clubs, we had actually great S&C lifestyle because we could get it from the men's rugby team, and it's sad that's the reality. But I think in terms of collective voice, yes, the Players Association, this is the way to go. And I actually think, I just wanted to touch on something you were saying earlier, like, this is sort of going off topic, is that? But you were saying if you're in the England programme, you can do it full time. If you're not, then it's hard. And I've always been in the England programme, just transitioned off of it. And the MPA has been amazing in helping me work out what's next. And I think this is potentially where men's sport can even learn from women's sport, because the nature of our environment means that we have to have other things going on, and so we're naturally more set up to come out and transition out. And so with our player associations working, I know this isn't for netball because we're predominantly women's, but working to educate both the men's side as well, but then take our own stuff from it because of the way we've naturally been set up. Sorry, I know that went off topic.
No, it's all relative. And I think it is really important to understand that athletes are people and they need to understand what happens after retirement. And we talk about retirement with athletes, but actually if you think about it, everybody retires at some stage of their life. So typically when you're older from a job, and the huge impact that has on people is massive. And so athletes just have that at a younger stage in their careers, and so it's really important to try and help them to transition and understand. And so players associations play a huge part in that. But I think what's really significant is that everything's individualized, because we are all different, all have different experiences. And so I just wondered, I wanted to speak with you, Paige, around anything specifically that has impacted you individually that you've had to lean on the Players Association for. And I also know that you're on the board of your association. So what made you take that step to be actually active within the association?
So I think I got elected fairly quickly, I think through my work with the facilities, to try and help them understand more about what we were trying to push for as females, and going back to the collective voice. Like, it did take, the association was trying to sort of improve facilities for female jockeys, but until a few of us got together and got a letter over to the regulatory body, no one really took it seriously. So I think that collective voice is really important. Like, I could only encourage, like, especially you, Sophia, like, if there are issues that you're having, don't be afraid to get your fellow colleagues together to go and, like, tell them what's wrong, because a lot of the time there's so many issues that athletes face in general. Like, you've got to be able to show why it really, that particular subject really matters, and especially in, like, female issues. I think that's really important at the moment as well. But otherwise, in general, touch points, again, going back to, like, the training and stuff's been great. Mental health provisions and the sort of one-on-one contact has been brilliant. From disciplinary matters are massive for jockeys. And I can remember there was one day I literally got into a bit of a tiff on TV with another jockey passing the winning line, and I got banned. And everyone was like, you guys were about 2 meters away from each other, you got a 4-day ban for doing what? And I could literally call up Paul Struthers, who was CEO at the time, and he was there, like, right, I'll sort this out for you that evening. He was, like, reassuring us, and that's massive, having that. Look, we're a membership of 400, so compared to the PFA, obviously it's different, but that sort of real ease of access is crazy. And especially, like, from my transition now, we're so lucky as well. We've got the Injured Jockeys Fund as well, who support our sort of well-being. And for me, obviously, I'm kind of going through a transition at the moment where, to be honest, I'm not myself anyway because I'm getting over an injury, but I'm also going through a transition of, you know, obviously my career got cut short and having to navigate all those sorts of things. And I just can't believe the support I've had. I mean, luckily, I came to grips with it myself very easily. But the provisions that are available to me are phenomenal. And so, yeah, I'm very grateful for all of that.
Thanks. And Sophia, you burst onto the scene last year, and so I wondered, you're a member of the PCA, so I wondered if you've lent on them for anything so far in your career.
Yeah, I think, like, last year I obviously started very, very well, so I didn't really have much to say to them. But I think this year, obviously, the second year is normally always one of the hardest years in your career after you've had such a good year. So I think naturally, like, I had to lean on them when things probably didn't go as well as they did last year. And yeah, I've definitely used Sophie over there and Crops, who so Crops is our regional sort of personal development person, so we can message him, ring him whenever. He'll always pick up, and he's normally there at training quite regularly. And then Sophie came in when he was on paternity leave, so I was really lucky in the fact that I had them to lean on when things weren't going as well as I want. And obviously when you're quite young, you can't always take things the best on your own, so you actually need people's like help to say, actually, like, you're 18, like, you're not going to perform like at this level all the time. So I think that was really nice. And I think, yeah, as you said earlier about like having people that aren't involved in the setup is nice. I think, like, when I look at it, like, the last person you want to go to is normally the coach if they're selecting you, and you know you're upset about how you're performing or other situations. So I think it's nice that I can rely on going up to the PCA and saying, like, oh, I feel like I just need some support, or have a chat with the coach about something. Like, it's really nice to have that. And I think they've been really good with with like we had an instance where we sort of the men had the training facilities and the women didn't get them on the day, and we all collectively went to the PCA and said, like, this wasn't good enough. Like, we sort of got treated as sort of extras in that sense. So I think, like, we were very good together at coming together and bringing the PCA in when needed.
Thanks. And you mentioned earlier your parents, and I wondered if your parents have had any interactions with the PCA, or do you have to deal directly with the PCA all the time? Because in terms of your age, obviously you're reasonably young and you still rely on your parents for lots of support. So has the PCA supported your family as well as you?
Well, yeah, like last year I was still in the safeguarding category, which was really annoying. So there was, I basically had to have a room on my own all the time, or I wasn't. When I was here in the 100, I basically wasn't allowed out of the hotel. I was only allowed 1 minute walk to Tesco's, which was terrible. And then when we did go out to play mini golf, they told me I had to get ID'd, so that was great. So back I went. But I think now that I'm 18, like, it did hit me. I relied a lot on my parents to take me here, there and everywhere, and they did everything. My mum basically told me, like, get up, you're going to cricket. And then I realised, like, I've actually got to get myself together and start, like, messaging people. So it did hit me. I don't think they had that much interaction, because as I said last year, I sort of had such a good year that I didn't really have any issues, so I was just like, woo, this is great. And then, I sort of, and because I think I wasn't a professional at the time, so I didn't really know much about the PCA. And then, as I said, I made my professional debut in, I think it was like July maybe, and then obviously had a good year then, so I didn't really have much time to think about what the PCA did until obviously I came on a professional contract. So I was lucky in the sense that my mum didn't have to have all the emails or like have the messages about like, oh, I want to speak to Crops about something or Sophie about something. So it's quite nice that she's not always involved, just because it was quite annoying for her. But I think I'm lucky that now that it's down to me. I don't have to say, oh, mum, like, because I know what my mum's like. She's always told me, oh, get a grip, like, you'll be fine. Like, if I have a bad day and I just want to speak to someone, she'll say, oh, get a grip, like, you'll be fine, like, it's cricket. Like,
she sounds like my mum.
Yeah, like, my mum, like, mum's one of those people I'd fall over and she wouldn't come. She'd say, Sophia will get up herself.
You'd have broken your arm, it turns out, but she's lifting.
So I was sort of one of those people that when I'm now on my own, like, it's actually quite nice, because I don't have to tell my mum, like, oh, I'm in a really bad mood about my cricket. I can just sort of leave that alone. She won't tell me the annoying things like, oh, you'll be fine, because that's just not what you want to hear. So it's quite nice that I can communicate on my own with the PCA.
Perfect, thanks. And just to each of you, what particular things can your Players Association do to support you and your sport? And in light of being a female, so we talked about the maternity policy and things, but also there's probably things that affect both male and female athletes. So what are those things that could be done differently or is already being done, could be shared amongst different players' associations, because potentially we're not all doing the same things?
Yeah, I think for us, obviously, the big difference is obviously the maternity policy, which was huge. That was a big thing, obviously difference. And then, like we said, the support ranges from like educational, thinking about what's next for you, transitioning, mental health, like private services. You know, that it's so wide ranging. And I think one of the things is it probably has learned from the men's game as well about some of the errors and mistakes they've made along the way, which again, but it's about also what works for us. We are different, we have different needs, and I think our association is very receptive to understanding that. And we have, I don't know if it's the same way, obviously we have a rep, so we vote for a rep every year that sits on the board. And I mean, she's now off on maternity policy, but she did a wonderful job. I think she's vice chair now, so she's well respected within the whole of the board, not just from our side of things. And I think having that voice, that players collective, understanding where the game is professionally, for us, I think they've done an amazing job, and they've grown along with where the Red Roses have gone. And I think we're very fortunate with the support that they give the whole of the players group.
I was just gonna say it's sort of, I've never really felt like, I want more from the PFA, because I think the issues in and around women's sport, I think they're constantly evolving and new things are cropping up as the game is growing. Sort of problems are popping up, and then that is where the union comes in terms of support. I remember specifically, I think it was maybe just this season gone, it's been a long season, but in terms of the doping, they started, so traditionally we'd just do, if doping came in, it'd be a urine test. So what happened was you could be, I was down in Brighton, and you could be up at Everton and doping turn up for an away game, and everyone sat on the bus waiting for 1 to 3 people to have a wee. So who does the doping? Is it UK? Yeah. Anyway, they started to try and introduce hair sampling last season. So I think the first time they came around was in pre-season. They came to the training ground, and they wanted to take hair samples, and it was happening sort of around all the WSL clubs as well. And we actually, sort of a few of us got in touch with, I think it was you, Fern, wasn't it? Yeah. Because obviously cutting a piece of hair, especially for, well, I can speak for myself, do you know what I mean, as a black player, sort of hair is quite a sensitive topic, and it has been for quite a long time. And the thought of someone just chopping a chunk of your hair out, I've actually seen some of the girls that have had it done, and even now they can have if they don't like, did someone say something? Oh, I was like, but the great thing about the PFA do you know what I mean? A few people got in touch with Fern and the PFA, and actually that policy was meant to be in place for the whole season going forward to make it quicker to do sampling, but because of the issues, the collective voice that we had, that was scrapped. So it's just back to urine testing, but it's just little things like that, because without the union, I don't really know where you'd start with that, because obviously doping is a very sensitive topic, and I fully support the reasons why it's done. But in terms of the methods used, it didn't really consider female athletes from ethnic minorities in that sense. So yeah, that was literally a conversation that was had, and it was resolved very quickly. So yeah.
I can imagine it being sensitive. If I had my hair in braids, nobody's cutting a piece of my braid to then have it come out and things. So I guess it's great that you had the opportunity to go to the Players Association and they could do something about it. And I guess you're not saying you don't want to have that testing, but there needs to be an exploration about how it will be done and what's going to happen. Because I think you got distracted, but you're probably saying that if you don't style your hair a certain way, the players who've had a piece of their hair cut out, you can notice it.
Yeah, one of my good friends, she actually had it at another club, and I saw her last week, and she tried to wear her hair in a low pony, but this bit was just like sticking up, which she's got a gel, and that's like 6 months on. Do you know what I mean? And it's just I think for anyone, just having a random piece of hair sticking out, that, especially when you can just have a wee. So yeah, it's really easy. No one's bothered. No one's shy. So.
Can you just say the original question?
The question was basically just around what the Players Association can do for female athletes moving forwards.
I think one of the biggest things that the MPA has been doing, but also where we've got so much work to do, is around like female health and the menstrual cycle and stuff like that. Netball's potentially one of the unique sports that could be leading this, because we're a female only, well, no, that's not true, but predominantly female sport. And I know the MPA have been doing amazing work getting, for example, Dr. Emma Ross, who I know works a lot in that area, bringing her in to talk to us, creating working groups and that sort of thing. But as an athlete, or as a female athlete, I hear things all the time like, oh, certain times of your cycle you might be able to do this and this, but I don't have enough knowledge to know really what I should be training, and it's not put into your S&C schedule and anything like that. And at the top of your game, all the margins are so small anyway that we're potentially missing a trick here. If I don't know what it's like if you have good research or stuff going on in other sports, but if on day 7 I should be doing this, or it might not be as specific as that, but I think so much more research needs to go into this, because I want to be maximising my training at certain times and maybe doing different trainings at different times. I don't know if this is what it should be like, but we don't have enough research to know.
It's funny you say that, actually, because it's technically not something the union have done, but I think it is off the back of pushing for better practice in clubs, because at Brighton we started using an app last season called Fitter Woman. Some people will be familiar with it, and I think it's headed by a company called Orico, and so it's just a basic period tracker, and you can log sort of flow and symptoms that you're having all the way through your cycle, not just when you're actually menstruating. And so we started doing this at the beginning of pre-season, and we filled out a survey for Orico, just talking about like history of sort of your cycle and any issues that had arisen. And actually mine flagged up, and so the club. So Orico flagged it to the club, and then the club actually sent me to a gynaecologist. And to be honest with you, I can talk about it, I hope no one's squeamish, but like my periods are heavy, but they're not. My period is normal. Like, I've been regular. I just had it was more the heaviness of my period and also some symptoms I had around it. But anyway, I flagged up. I was a red flag, and so I went to a gynaecologist, and he had a look with an ultrasound, and actually everything on the ultrasound looked absolutely fine, but he said, based on your symptoms, I would actually recommend at the end of the season that you have a diagnostic laparoscopy. So I actually had that last Thursday, and I sort of went into the operation. It probably only takes about half an hour. But I kind of went into it thinking there's nothing really wrong with me, but actually, since the club are paying for it and they want to support me, do you know what I mean? I'll go for it. Like, it's better the devil you know kind of thing. And so I was put to sleep, and I just thought, oh, see you in a bit. Anyway, I woke up and I was like, oh, like, was there anything, like, did you see anything? And they were like, actually, you've got moderate to severe endometriosis. So I had it ablated. And yeah, I've still got my patches on to cover up my wounds, but it's actually, my point is that sort of the unions and the clubs pushing for better practice actually could potentially benefit my long-term health and fertility. So yeah, I don't really know what to say really. It's been like quite a weird week. Yeah. But yeah. The point I'm sort of getting to is that it's not just sort of on-pitch issues and things around, you know, being the best player ever or things like that. It's like just sort of the support like the life support that you get. Do you know what I mean? Because that is potentially kind of game changing for me, especially coming towards the end of my career. And I would like a family one day. Do you know what I mean? And I know a lot of women suffer with endometriosis, and a lot of women don't even know they've got it. And I think through the NHS, I think I was reading the wait time is 8 to 10 years for something like that. So I have benefited from better practice being pushed for. And yeah, that's actually amazing for me, and actually amazing for all the girls that are just starting on the professional pathway. And obviously I'm very grateful to Brighton and Hove Albion for sort of, even though I'm out of contract, do you know what I mean, they've honoured that. So they've, yeah, and I think that is, yeah, it's massive, and I hope that other clubs follow. I know Chelsea women use the same company as well. I'm not sure about other clubs, but sort of if those standards, if that bar is constantly getting lifted, then you know what I mean, then just female athletes in general will hopefully benefit, you know what I mean, across all female sport.
Thanks for sharing that, Victoria, and I think it is good to share, and so the more people hear about those things, the more clubs hear other clubs are doing it, hopefully they will push. I think I was in my last year for a professional contract 2 years ago and had a talk from a players association in New Zealand, and they talked about, I think it's called Red 7, and it was about the female menstrual cycle and how it impacts you, and I was like, I've had this my whole life. And I thought, how have I got to the stage and experience that I have and don't know about my body and about these symptoms, which I've been flagging for years to various doctors at clubs at international level, and it's just been brushed over. So all the research to date pretty much centres around men and men's bodies. And we were talking earlier about, as a female athlete now and definitely historically, you just wanted to fit in and you just wanted to be accepted and be an athlete, so you did whatever you had to do, and if it was conform to being masculine or conform to those norms, that's what you did. And actually now we're addressing the conversation and saying, if you want female athletes to be at their peak, you're looking at tiny percentages, and so if you're going to be looking at tiny percentages in every other aspect, why wouldn't you look holistically at the female and her body? I wanted to go to you, Paige, just in terms of making weight. And so you're in a sport where you have to be a certain weight in order to compete. So that potentially has significant impact on female athletes. We're not saying that men don't suffer from similar issues, but how has that impacted you, and how have the association supported that?
So I was really lucky. As a jumps jockey, minimum weight's 10 stone. So for me, I never had an issue making weights, but I know that is an issue for female jockeys. There has been a couple of university studies into the general sort of effect of water retention throughout the menstrual cycle, and that's obviously potentially quite a big thing. But again, I think because the research is so slim and everybody's bodies are so different and react so differently to weight management, that I suppose people probably haven't quite realised that might be something they need to. I don't ride on the flat, so I haven't got that sort of experience of sitting with those colleagues, but I think it's such an interesting topic in general, because a lot of player associations, I know for our player association, like we have a team of 5 or 6 really, and it becomes very difficult, especially when you're fighting fires of certain issues all the time. Like for us, we've got some really big, heavy topics going on at the moment. For players as a general, like it's very difficult to keep those sort of the momentum with female issues going. And it's sort of quite an interesting one to work out, you know, how we can further collectively, like, you know, do stuff, because that's just the most, like, phenomenal story to hear. That is just amazing. And it's so interesting you were saying about the drugs testing, because I had a female jockey say to me about, you know, the urine testing. For us, there was sort of a few scandals about urine samples being swapped, and so now people have to sit in there and watch you peeing, which for a 16, 17-year-old, you know, when she's on her period, having to sit there in front of someone and pee basically blood into a cup is a really uncomfortable situation. But again, for us, like it's been mentioned, and because there's so many other things going on, it's quite low down on the pile because it doesn't affect that many people. And sometimes I do think our association is great, but I know that it must be a struggle for associations to sort of prioritise stuff that only affects 20% of their members when there are sort of, it's a very difficult cycle, isn't it? I don't know how we get out of it, but hearing the collective stories, obviously, I know this is what the PPF is here for, and I really hope that, you know, these sorts of events will really help, because I know that there's so much information here that we can all do to help each other. And like, as I say, that story is phenomenal. And I know the maternity stuff, like we've got no maternity cover or preparations or anything. I was just talking to our PGA rep here today about it, because, you know, for me, looking at some of my other colleagues, I always had in my head, right, when I want to have children, I'll be stopping. Because for many different reasons, also, I don't want to be hitting the deck at 35 miles an hour when I've got 2 children at home. Like, that's just not what I want to do. But there will be people who want to do that. And it's just finding those provisions and making sure they're in place, and what we can do cross-industry. And obviously very appreciative of the PPF and providing these. But I think it's really important that we use this now to hopefully push that forwards further.
Yeah, I think there's not enough discussion around the potential that you might want to carry a child later in your career. So that's something that really, I think, needs addressing in terms of athletes in the early days of their career need to understand what potential things they can do if they do potentially want to have children in the future. I had a story around drug testing. So in Australia, I was on my period and was selected for drug testing and just thought I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. And I got into the cubicle, and you obviously can't close the door, and the lady said, drop your knickers and spin around. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's horrifying. Anyway, I was on my period, and as you say, you pee blood. And then I had peed into the pot and said to her, you can take the pot, I don't care. And I was hoping that she would move away so I could change my tampon, and she literally stood there. And I was just like, so we kind of had a standoff. But anyway, I won't finish the story. But it's just horrifying things that happen. And even in that situation, if I could have spoken to someone to say beforehand, I'm on my period, can we have a discussion around how this interaction is going to go? That would have been, I guess, it would have taken a stress off my mind, definitely. So there's so many things that I guess as a female you have to deal with. And we're reaching the end of our discussion. I just want to ask Sarah one more question before I throw to the audience. If you have a question, put your hand up and I'll come and give you a mic. But Sarah, in the meantime, I just wanted you to touch on, you've had an illustrious career. It's been a long and successful career. I just wanted you to touch on how things have changed since, from when you started to when you've just retired now, in terms of within the sport in general, and also with your interactions with your Players Association.
Yeah, like it's like night and day, if I'm completely honest. I got my first cap back in 2007. You might have just been born by then. I don't know how good my math. Yeah, just God, makes me feel really old. And we weren't part of England Rugby, so we had our own governing body. And I mean, I'm looking at Christian. I don't think that we even were part of the association then. Forgive me if we were. I didn't know. I was 21, so probably Ken didn't care. So I don't think it was until we came into England Rugby in 2012 that actually we started to go, right, well, we'll have that association. So yeah, like I said, we weren't professional. We didn't turn professional until 2019. When we first started, we played in wonderful rugby clubs, but they weren't international venues. Front of a few hundred people. We didn't have the same rows. I didn't really have many sponsors. At times had to sort of pay our way, which is like so different now when we've got, again, world record at Twickenham, 58,000 to win a Grand Slam, Six Nations. Like the crowds have just got bigger, sponsorship, commercialization. Like I said, world-leading contracts for the players that are going into this season. It's in a really, really positive place. And like we've had some great trailblazers who've allowed that to happen. And yeah, I mean, people ask me, would I wanted to start now? And genuinely, like it's wonderful for those players that are starting out like yourself, but I actually really enjoyed like my career and seeing it from the amateur days into professionalization. And yeah, I don't think you could do stuff back then that you couldn't get away with now, so we won't mention what that is. But yeah, so like it is, and it's brilliant to see where the women's sport like obviously football have kind of led the way with that, and cricket, and you know, like it's brilliant to now see, and we're doing things differently to men's rugby. Like we're looking at like where do we place like the international games for us? How do we have the women's premiership? You know, like how does that best work? We've got some great people in charge of making decisions. That isn't going, well, men's rugby have done it like this, we've got to do it, and we've got to keep reminding ourselves of that. Actually, women are different. We look at men's rugby at the minute, it's not in the greatest shape anyway, so actually like let's be individual and unique to ourselves, which I think is something that hopefully we're learning from. But yeah, it's in a wonderful place, and I feel very lucky to have come through and seen those changes along the way.
Thanks. Are there any audience questions?
Hi. That's fantastic. Thank you. Quite emotional listening to all of that too. I've got a quick question, I guess, for Paige on racing. And you talked like just 20%, I don't know what the percentage was of women that are racing. I met a jockey at an event in Liverpool, a young jockey, and she told me a few horror stories of treatment in the yard. So I guess my question is, how much do we need to change who those women are in leadership roles within the associations? How much does that need to change for attitudes to kind of impact women across the sport?
Yeah, I think it's quite an interesting question, because horse racing in general doesn't have an awful lot of sort of, until you get to the real top levels, you kind of mix in with the general industry for a lot. So I think as well as the association and how the association addresses those issues, I think it's a wider issue among the industry and the way that the regulatory board are sort of engaging with those problems. I know there's a lot of work going on at the moment to really sort of up what's expected of people, which is sort of overdue. And I really hope that the work that's been going on over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of progressive work going on. So I'm really hoping that that will change attitudes towards sort of women in the industry. But actually, as I say, it's like I've mentioned a couple of times, I think our industry, the sort of level of respect for participants, full stop, whether you're male or female, I think it can be quite low. And I think it's just generally part of that sort of readjustment across the industry will then ultimately help us, but it's not something that just the PGA on its own can address.
Working? Yeah. Hi, I've just got a question for Victoria. So, like we said before, we sort of see football as being the leaders. And I play cricket myself. And since the growth of the game, I'd say one of the main issues still within our professional structure is the facilities and how it works within sort of the men's game. So you said you spent 5 years at Brighton. So I sort of wondered, how does that work? Do you share facilities with them? Do you have your own facilities? Because, yeah, it's a big... The more, females that are playing sport, even working in a school previously, it's almost like they don't have the facilities there for the women to play as much as the men.
Yeah, so Brighton actually heavily invested, the owner, Tony Bloom, heavily invested in a separate building for the women. So the women and girls section, we have a separate building from them. It's on the same site, and we share the same canteen as the men's first team and academy teams. But we actually have our own building, so within that, I think we share a proportion of it with Albion and the community. So the community side, because they have a 3G pitch outside the building. But yeah, we have our own section which you can only enter with a fingerprint. And we've got changing rooms, shower facilities. I call it a common room. That's what we used to call it when we were at school. I don't know what they're called now. They're probably called something cooler. But yeah, lounge. Yeah. A kitchen area. We've got our own gym in there. I say we, I'm not there anymore. But yeah, there's a gym there, a pool, with where you can raise the floor. So for girls that are rehabbing, so that they can do sort of hydrotherapy in there. Yeah, so that's not the norm. Brighton, I think, have sort of put out a bit of a post there, because I think when you look at it, normally people think of women's football and they think of, I don't know, the top 3, the top 4, whatever you want to call them now. But I think that is a significant step by a club that prior to this season, I know the men have had a really good season, but prior to that were probably not considered a big club in football in general. So the commitment to the women's section to actually provide a facility and actually mean it, because I think that's probably still an ongoing problem in women's football. The WSL is seen as a professional league, and it is, but there are differing levels of professionalism within that. I know teams sort of from the middle of the table down have struggled, are still struggling to this day for better conditions, operating conditions as a professional. So yeah, that's been really significant, because and I'm not saying Brighton aren't a big club. I'm a Leeds fan, so it's terrible for me. But my point is that if it is what they've done is show that it's actually possible, and that puts pressure on all the teams. So rather than you just being part of a club as a token gesture and to tick a box, actually actively showing that you're making a long-term commitment, and that is a long-term commitment. So I think for the girls that are coming up from the academy, they can see that this is potentially, well, it is a long-term thing that they can strive for, because I think throughout my career, I've been similar to you, really. Like, I've seen the pits of it. Do you know what I mean? Where I remember, like, every other month just getting an envelope with ranging between about 20 and 60 quid for what was technically like full-time, part-time hours, but like it was costing you to play. So now actually getting like a full-time wage, that is great, but also the conditions surrounding that, because I know some teams were struggling, didn't even have a gym. They were in a porter cabin, and they had a section of the porter cabin. I think someone's dad had made like a squat rack for them, and that they were operating in the Women's Super League. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, I think being professional and actually doing it properly, I think Brighton are a fantastic example of that, and the ownership and the commitment to actually pushing the women's sport forward and operating on the same level as the men, really, because I think that is important as well. Not only like on pitch but off pitch, like I spoke to you about earlier. It's just actually the whole player and committing to that like you would with men's sport. I think, yeah, that's the next step for women's sport in general, that equity. So I hope that answers your question. I feel like I've gone off on a tangent. So
No, you didn't. And I think sport has come a long way, and that's incredible that Brighton have that, even just as an adjustable floor pool, on top of just an area to train on the pitch is huge. So that's massive. And I think as things happen in the elites get level, they'll start filtering down. I was having a conversation last week with a dad who said, I didn't realise it was so bad for females. He's got daughters, and his daughter, I think she's 8, and he said, my daughter called me up yesterday at 3:30 saying, I need you to come and pick me up, I'm standing outside school. And he said, I thought you had football training. And he said, there's not enough football coaches, so the boys are having football and the girls has been cancelled. And that was just a standard thing. And so if Brighton and Hove Albion are starting to do this with their female athletes, and females see what they can aspire to, eventually it will peter down to school age, that it's not acceptable to have substandard practices for female athletes at whatever level that they're competing at.
Sorry, can I just say as well, because we were just talking about earlier and saying like with most of women's sport sort of either on the cusp of professionalism or maybe even not yet, there's this sort of expectancy that we're to just be grateful to go professional and accept minimum standards. But yeah, I think that is the next step, making sure that there are minimum standards and actually you are being looked after, because getting a full-time wage, I mean, some of the wages that I've been on, players I know are still on, they're not even livable wages, but the time commitment is like you can't do anything else, or if you want to do something else, then people are literally working themselves into the ground to do so. So it doesn't really then match up to actually being a professional sportswoman, if you know what I mean. So yeah, I think that has to be at the forefront. Those conditions have to actually like mimic sort of the output that you're getting. I think
it's important that the rhetoric is delivered well. So I think the England netball said that we've got a full-time programme now, so athletes, I don't know why they're complaining. And it's like, yes, it's full-time in terms of the time commitment I give. However, I could never afford to pay my rent or pay a mortgage without the support of other people. And so the perception for the public is, oh, well, you're full-time, why are you complaining? But actually, that's not in practice what happens. And also, what Victoria said, it's about the conditions as well. So it's not just about money. Like, money can only go so far. I wish it was, I was going to say it might be £1 million and we would still be complaining about conditions, but we'd still be happy for the £1 million, don't get me wrong. But it is around conditions as well. So.
Yeah, and I was just going to add, like, I think that sort of step up that we've experienced, what's nice is what we thought was reachable and unreachable from our level when we started. So, you know, like, I very much didn't think that I could be a professional jockey. So when I turned, I was like, I just want to be a successful professional jockey, however that looks. But you know, when they come in and the bar's already set higher, they can achieve even further higher. That doesn't make good English, but like, but their sights are set so much higher. Like, it was quite satisfying for me. There was a female jockey that went over to Jersey at the weekend, which for anyone who doesn't know horse racing, like, Jersey is obviously a very, very small, its own little thing. It's very amateur sport over there, but professionals can ride. And she sent me a Snapchat, and the changing room looked absolutely fine, and she was like, "Welcome to Jersey," with a sort of, you know, emoji. And I thought, God, you have no idea what we were changing if you think that's bad. And that sort of, for me, I was like, that's great that she sort of thinks that that standard is kind of what should be minimum. And she is already thinking about so much better things for herself, which for me is so satisfying to think that these younger girls are able to imagine things so much better for themselves.
Yeah, so that's all that we have time for, but it's...
I've got one question. I'll be quick, I promise. It's just sort of following on from that, really. Like, it's great to hear all your journeys, and you've all kind of seen it all. I think Sophia's journey is really interesting because you played for Western Storm as a pay-to-play player. You got thrown into the 100 last year, so you've gone from 1 week playing in front of 50, 100 people to live on Sky, a full house at the Oval, like, completely different. And then you've got your professional contract in October. Like, how is that, like, kind of what you said, that you've worked and you've seen it all, and then some people, you know, Sophia's landed on it, whereas she's got a professional contract and hasn't actually seen the other side of it. How has that transition into professional cricket been for you?
I'm sort of on this sort of thing about obviously the full house at the Oval and all that. I think when I look at it now and I look at, like, the Storm games when you get like 150 people, I think, oh God, like, why is there not more people watching women's sport? And it does really frustrate me. But yeah, when I look back at last year, yeah, it was a jump that I was talking to someone earlier, and I said I still can't believe that I walked out on this pitch after playing, like 3 games in professional cricket, and there was like, however, I don't know how many this fills, but it was absolutely rocking on, like, and in a night game as well. And I think I came on the second over and seemed perfectly fine. I don't know if it was the adrenaline and I just wasn't thinking straight at all. But yeah, I think when I look at it, the fact that I hadn't even really experienced much cricket, I guess it probably helped me because I just thought I had nothing to lose. I think when I look at last year, like, I was a small fish in a big pond, so I just had, you know, I just went out, bowl, and you get a wicket, woohoo, and you go walk off. Whereas now, like, it's hard because obviously you're like, oh my God, like, people know who you are now, so it's like, oh, you've got to perform well, and then that becomes that pressure. So I think, yeah, like last year when I look at it, cricket was quite easy last year because you didn't have to worry about what anyone thought. You know, you didn't really have social media. Like, obviously it's a massive impact on life now, especially of obviously someone young. Like, transition last year, like, people were like, oh my God, look at this brilliant youngster, like, she's doing really well. And like, now you do get the odd, like, negative comment, well, she did really well last year but she hasn't performed that well this year. And like, it is quite hard then to think, like, you doubt yourself, like, is it just a 1 year thing, like, are you not as good as you think? So I think, like, yeah, I feel like I've gone off topic, but I think with the fans thing, like, I think there's still massive things we can work on to, I think, just help bridge that gap from the 100 to regional cricket, I think, because it is really hard. Like, it's very nerve-wracking going out there when there's 30,000 people and you're used to, you know, a few old men coming to watch, and there's like 150 people, and you can also basically hear silence at the grounds. Like, I think it's hard, and I think that's where like PCA and us as players can look to try and develop that, because I know, like, when it's the men's game, like the Vitality Blast, they obviously get quite a few thousand in, whereas, you know, we're quite happy if we get 300 people. So yeah, I think there's obviously a lot to work on, but with the fan stuff, I don't understand how I transitioned into the crowds, but I managed okay in the end. But it was, I can imagine my parents were absolutely terrified when I weren't involved. So yeah.
Thanks very much, and thanks for your questions. As we've heard, we've come a long way, but there is still a long way to go. And we heard about individual experiences, but also the power of the collective voice and players' associations representing athletes. It's really important to share our stories and share your learnings with each other. So the PPF are really important in helping us achieve that. So hopefully we'll be sitting here in a couple of years and saying things are incredible, and there's still a little bit of a way to go, but we've come even further. Next, there's going to be a group discussion, which hopefully you'll all be involved in. So we're going to split into 3 groups. Kira and Sarah Gandon from the Netball Players Association are going to facilitate a group around women's health. So that group, if you could gather with your chairs sort of over there. There's going to be a group around maternity policy, which will be hosted by Sarah and Lindsay Hislop from the RPA. And the final group will be Sophia and Lindsay Williams from the PCA, and they will be discussing contracts and agents. And there'll also be a wider discussion around player development within each of the groups. So if Sophia's group comes sort of to the centre of the room here, and the other group just goes to the back. So feel free to go to whichever group that you want to go to. And finally, that just leaves me to thank our incredible panel. So thank you very much, girls.